Immanuel Kant was born in the year 1724 in the Prussian city of Königsberg, a quiet and disciplined place far from the great cultural capitals of Europe. He would live his entire life there. He would never travel far, never see the world in the usual sense. Yet from this small and orderly city, Kant would change how human beings understand knowledge, morality, freedom, and reason itself. Kant was born into a modest and deeply religious family. His parents belonged to a strict Protestant tradition that emphasized inner discipline, moral seriousness, and humility. From childhood, Kant was taught that life was not about pleasure or success, but about duty and responsibility. This early moral atmosphere shaped his entire character. He was physically weak and often ill. He was small, frail, and never robust. This pushed him inward. He became observant, reflective, and disciplined, where others relied on physical presence or social confidence. Kant relied on clarity of thought and consistency of habit. From an early age, Kant showed extraordinary intellectual ability. He studied mathematics, physics, philosophy, and natural science at the University of Königsberg. At this time, European thought was divided by a deep conflict. On one side were thinkers who believed reason alone could uncover the deepest truths of reality. They trusted logic and abstract thinking. On the other side were thinkers who believed all knowledge came from experience, from what we see, touch, and observe. This conflict created a crisis. If reason alone could give us truth, then experience was unreliable. If experience alone was the source of knowledge, then certainty itself was an illusion. Kant initially followed the rational thinkers. He believed reason could explain the structure of reality. But then he encountered the writings of David Hume. Hume argued that even basic ideas like cause and effect were not logically necessary. We believe one thing causes another simply because we're used to seeing them together. This argument shook Kant deeply. If Hume was correct, then science had no real foundation. Morality had no certainty. Human knowledge itself was unstable. Kant refused to accept that conclusion. But instead of rejecting Hume, he took him seriously. And this led Kant to a radical insight. Instead of asking how the human mind knows the world, Kant asked a new question. What if the world as we experience it is shaped by the structure of the human mind? This idea changed everything. Kant argued that the mind is not a passive receiver of information. It actively organizes experience. Space and time are not discovered in the world. They are the forms through which we experience anything at all. Causality is not something we observe directly. It is a rule the mind uses to make sense of events. This means we never experience reality exactly as it exists independently. We experience reality as it appears to us through the structure of human understanding. Kant made a crucial distinction. There is the world as it appears to us, and there is the world as it exists in itself. Human beings can never directly know reality as it exists independently of perception. This does not mean reality is unreal. It means human knowledge has limits. Kant believed this insight saved both science and reason. Science works because the mind brings order to experience. But metaphysical speculation fails when it tries to go beyond possible experience. This became the foundation of Kant's most important work, the Critique of Pure Reason. In this work, Kant asked a simple but powerful question. What can we know? He argued that the human mind contains basic structures that shape all experience. Without these structures, experience would be chaotic and meaningless. The mind does not copy reality. It organizes it. This explains how mathematics and natural science are possible. They're grounded in the way the human mind structures experience. At the same time, this explains why traditional metaphysics fails. When reason tries to talk about the soul, God, or the universe as a whole as objects of knowledge, it goes beyond its limits and falls into illusion. Kant did not reject these ideas entirely. He believed they still mattered deeply, but not as objects of knowledge. Their importance belonged to another domain. This brings us to Kant's moral philosophy. Kant believed morality could not be based on feelings, desires, or consequences. Feelings change. Desires conflict. Outcomes are uncertain. If morality depended on these things, it would collapse. Instead, Kant argued that morality must be grounded in reason itself. A moral action is not moral because it produces happiness. It is moral because it is done from duty. If someone does the right thing because it benefits them, that action has no moral worth. If someone does the right thing because it feels good, it still has no moral worth. Only when someone does the right thing because it is right does the action have moral value. This idea led Kant to his central moral principle, the categorical imperative. Before acting, a person must ask whether the rule they are following could be applied universally. If everyone acted this way, would the action still make sense? If the answer is no, the action is immoral. Another expression of this idea focuses on human dignity. Every person must be treated as an end in themselves, never merely as a means. Human beings are not tools. They possess intrinsic worth simply by being rational agents. This idea has shaped modern ideas of human rights, autonomy, and moral respect. Kant lived according to extreme regularity. He woke at the same time each day. He ate at the same hour. He walked the same route through Königsberg so precisely that neighbors set their clocks by him. This was not obsession. It was discipline. Kant believed freedom was not the absence of rules. Freedom was self-rule through reason. He never married. He never sought power or fame. He devoted his life to clarity, consistency, and moral seriousness. As Kant aged, his physical strength declined, but his influence expanded. His ideas reshaped philosophy across Europe. Yet Kant himself remained humble. He believed his greatest achievement was not discovering ultimate truth, but showing the limits of human knowledge and the seriousness of moral responsibility. He believed that while human beings cannot know everything, they are still responsible for how they act. What we can know is limited. What we must do is not. As Kant's thinking matured, he turned his full attention to explaining exactly how human knowledge is possible without falling into illusion. He believed that philosophy had failed for centuries because thinkers try to answer questions that human reason was not equipped to answer. Instead of asking what the world is in itself, Kant asked how the human mind makes experience possible at all. He began by examining the most basic elements of experience. Before we can think about objects, events, or causes, something more fundamental must already be in place. According to Kant, this foundation is space and time. Space and time are not things that exist independently in the world. They are not containers in which objects float. They are forms of human perception. Every experience we have is already arranged spatially and temporally by the mind. This means that when you see an object, you do not first receive raw data and then organize it. The organization happens automatically. The mind presents experience as located in space and unfolding in time. Because of this, mathematics is possible. Geometry works because space is structured by the human mind. Arithmetic works because time provides the structure for counting and sequence. Kant believed this explained why mathematical truths feel necessary and universal. They are not discovered in the external world. They arise from the way the human mind must experience anything at all. Beyond space and time, Kant argued that the mind applies further concepts to experience. He called these concepts categories. These include ideas such as causality, substance, unity, plurality, and necessity. Without these categories, experience would be a stream of disconnected sensations. We would see colors and hear sounds, but nothing would make sense. There would be no objects, no events, no stable world. Causality is especially important. When one event follows another, we do not merely observe sequence. We experience cause. This is because the mind automatically connects events under the rule of causality. This response to David Hume was central. Hume had argued that causality is just habit. Kant replied that causality is a necessary condition of experience. Without it, experience would not be coherent at all. This does not mean causality exists independently of the mind. It means causality is the rule through which the mind understands events. Kant insisted on a critical distinction. The laws of science describe the world as it appears to us, structured by the human mind. They do not describe reality as it exists independently of all perception. This insight protected science while humbling metaphysics. We can have reliable knowledge of the natural world, but we cannot use reason to reach beyond experience. Kant argued that when reason tries to answer questions about the ultimate beginning of the universe, the existence of God as an object, or the immortality of the soul as a fact, it becomes trapped in contradictions. Reason begins to argue against itself. Kant called these contradictions antinomies. They arise because reason is being pushed beyond its proper limits. This does not make reason useless. It makes it responsible. Kant believed the true task of philosophy was not to expand knowledge endlessly, but to clarify the boundaries of human understanding. Once these boundaries are understood, reason can be used properly. This leads directly into Kant's theory of freedom. At first glance, Kant philosophy seems to deny freedom. If every event in the natural world is governed by causal laws, then human actions appear determined. But Kant introduced a crucial distinction. As natural beings, human actions belong to the world of appearances and are subject to causal laws. But as moral beings, humans belong to a different order. Kant argued that freedom is not something we observe. It is something we must assume in order to make sense of moral responsibility. If we were not free, moral obligation would be meaningless. Praise and blame would make no sense. Thus, freedom is not an object of knowledge. It is a necessary postulate of practical reason. This means that while we cannot prove freedom theoretically, we must act as if we are free. This idea allowed Kant to reconcile science and morality. Nature operates according to causal laws. Morality operates according to laws of reason. These two domains do not contradict each other because they belong to different perspectives on human beings. Kant then extended this reasoning to God and immortality. He did not argue that God exists as a provable fact. Instead, he argued that moral life requires certain assumptions. For morality to be meaningful, Kant believed we must assume that moral striving is not pointless. We must assume that justice ultimately makes sense. This leads to the idea of God as a moral ideal and immortality as the continuation of moral development. These are not objects of knowledge. They are practical necessities. Kant described this shift as making room for faith by limiting knowledge. Faith, in this sense, is not blind belief. It is rational commitment grounded in moral responsibility. Kant's ethical theory reached its fullest expression in his writings on moral law. He believed that moral law does not come from society, religion, or authority. It arises from reason itself. When a person recognizes a moral duty, they experience it as an inner command. This command is universal, unconditional, and binding. This is the experience of moral law. Kant believed this experience reveals something profound about human dignity. To be subject to moral law is not to be oppressed. It is to be autonomous. Autonomy means self-rule. It means giving oneself the law through reason. This is why Kant rejected any morality based on external reward or punishment. True morality must come from within. Throughout his later life, Kant continued refining these ideas. His writings became more precise, more disciplined, and more demanding. He believed philosophy must be rigorous, even if it becomes difficult. He did not write to entertain. He wrote to clarify. As his reputation grew, students from across Europe came to Königsberg to hear him lecture. His lectures were clear, structured, and systematic. He spoke slowly and carefully, ensuring understanding. Kant's daily life remained unchanged. He maintained his routines, his discipline, and his devotion to reason. He believed a well-ordered life reflected a well-ordered mind. As Kant approached old age, his memory began to fade. His body weakened, but his influence only increased. His ideas reshaped metaphysics, ethics, epistemology, and political thought. He believed his greatest contribution was not providing answers, but teaching humanity how to think responsibly. Reason has power. Reason has limits. Within those limits, human dignity stands. As Kant's work progressed, he became increasingly concerned with how human beings live together, not just how they think. Reason, for Kant, was never meant to be isolated inside the individual mind. It had social, political, and historical consequences. This concern led Kant to reflect deeply on enlightenment. For Kant, enlightenment was not a historical event or a political revolution. It was a process that occurs when individuals learn to use their own reason without relying blindly on authority. Human beings remain immature, Kant argued, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack courage. They fear thinking for themselves. They prefer guidance, tradition, and obedience. Enlightenment begins the moment a person dares to think independently. This does not mean rejecting all authority. It means testing authority through reason. Kant believed freedom of thought was essential for enlightenment to occur. Without the freedom to question, reason stagnates. However, Kant also believed freedom must be exercised responsibly. Reason must be public and disciplined, not chaotic or destructive. This balance between freedom and order became central to Kant's political philosophy. Kant supported constitutional government, rule of law, and civil rights. He opposed tyranny, despotism, and absolute monarchy. But he was not a revolutionary in the violent sense. He feared that uncontrolled revolution could destroy the very conditions that make moral progress possible. Kant believed reform through reason was superior to reform through violence. He argued that a just political system must respect the dignity of every individual. This dignity does not come from social status, wealth, or power. It comes from rational autonomy. Every human being, by virtue of being capable of moral reasoning, possesses intrinsic worth. This belief formed the foundation of modern human rights theory. Kant also reflected on international relations and war. He lived during a time of frequent conflict between European powers. War was seen as inevitable. Kant rejected this view. In his writings on perpetual peace, he argued that war is not a natural condition. It is a failure of reason. He proposed that lasting peace requires republican governments, international law, and mutual respect between nations. States, like individuals, must submit to laws grounded in reason. Kant believed that history, despite its violence and cruelty, showed signs of moral progress. This progress was not guaranteed. It was fragile and slow, but it was possible. Nature, he suggested, uses human conflict as a mechanism to force moral development. Competition, ambition, and struggle push societies to create laws and institutions that limit chaos. This idea allowed Kant to see meaning in history without assuming divine intervention. Human progress, for Kant, was not predetermined. It depended on reason learning to govern itself. Alongside politics, Kant turned to aesthetics, an area many philosophers had treated as secondary. Kant believed aesthetics revealed something essential about the human mind. This led to his third major work, concerned with judgment. Kant asked a simple but profound question. Why do we experience beauty as meaningful, even though it serves no practical purpose? When we see a beautiful landscape or hear a beautiful piece of music, we feel pleasure. But this pleasure is not tied to desire or usefulness. We do not want to possess beauty. We simply contemplate it. Kant argued that aesthetic judgment involves a free harmony between imagination and understanding. The mind plays freely without being forced into concepts. This experience feels universal. When we call something beautiful, we expect others to agree, even though beauty cannot be proven logically. Kant believed this revealed a shared structure of the human mind. Aesthetic experience becomes a bridge between nature and freedom. It shows how the mind can feel harmony without coercion. This insight had enormous influence on later thinkers, artists, and writers. Kant also distinguished between beauty and the sublime. Beauty involves harmony, balance, and form. The sublime involves vastness, power, and awe. When we face something overwhelming, like a storm or a mountain range, we feel fear and admiration at the same time. The sublime reveals the limits of our senses, but also the superiority of reason. Even when nature overwhelms us physically, our capacity to think morally remains intact. This reinforces Kant's central belief. Human dignity does not depend on physical strength or control. It depends on rational freedom. Kant aesthetics was not about art alone. It was about understanding how human beings relate to the world emotionally without losing rational autonomy. Throughout this period, Kant continued refining his moral philosophy. He emphasized that moral action must be guided by principles that can be universally applied. One must act only according to rules that could be followed by everyone without contradiction. This was not meant to be rigid or cold. Kant believed true morality respected humanity in oneself and others. To treat someone merely as a means is to deny their dignity. To treat them as an end is to recognize their autonomy. This idea deeply influenced later ethical thought, law, and political theory. Kant also explored education. He believed education was essential for moral progress. Children must be taught discipline, self-control, and respect for reason. But education should not crush individuality. It should cultivate independence. A properly educated person does not obey blindly. They obey laws they understand and endorse through reason. As Kant aged, his writing became more difficult. His ideas were precise but demanding. Many readers struggled, yet his influence spread rapidly. Thinkers across Europe recognized that philosophy could no longer ignore Kant. He had redefined what it meant to ask philosophical questions. Knowledge had limits. Morality had authority. Freedom had meaning. Kant never married. He lived quietly, but his intellectual legacy reshaped the modern world. He showed that reason could be critical without being destructive, moral without being dogmatic, and universal without being oppressive. As Immanuel Kant entered the final decades of his life, his body slowly weakened, but his mind remained disciplined and alert. His daily routine continued with near mathematical precision. He woke at the same hour, walked the same path, ate the same meals, and wrote with unwavering focus. This external order reflected his internal belief that freedom is not chaos, but self-governed structure. Kant believed that discipline was not the enemy of freedom. It was its condition. In his later years, Kant turned increasingly toward the deepest questions of human existence. He asked what we may hope for, given the limits of knowledge and the demands of morality. Human beings, he argued, live between two worlds. The world of nature, governed by cause and effect, and the world of freedom, governed by moral law. Science explains what happens. Morality explains what ought to happen. These two worlds cannot be merged into one system, yet both are necessary. Kant believed that religion, when purified by reason, plays a role in supporting moral life. But he strongly rejected blind faith, superstition, and religious authority that suppresses independent thinking. For Kant, religion was not about miracles or divine commands. It was about moral hope. The idea of God, he argued, is not something we can prove through reason, but it is something practical reason allows us to postulate, not as knowledge, but as moral orientation. Similarly, the idea of the soul and immortality cannot be known scientifically, but they give meaning to the moral struggle, suggesting that moral effort is not ultimately pointless. Kant was careful here. He did not claim these ideas were true in a factual sense. He claimed they were necessary for moral coherence. This careful distinction allowed Kant to preserve both reason and meaning without collapsing one into the other. As his fame grew, students traveled long distances to hear him lecture. His teaching style was calm, methodical, and demanding. He did not entertain. He trained minds. Many students initially found him difficult, but those who stayed discovered a new way of thinking, one that required patience, clarity, and responsibility. Kant insisted that philosophy must not provide comfort at the expense of truth, but he also believed truth ultimately leads to dignity. In his old age, Kant's memory began to fail. His health declined. Writing became slower. His once precise routine loosened. Yet even as his body weakened, his moral vision remained intact. Kant accepted aging and decline with quiet seriousness. He saw it as part of nature, not a personal injustice. In his final years, he worked on unfinished projects, revisiting earlier ideas and attempting to integrate them more fully. But time was no longer on his side. He died in 1804, in the city where he had lived his entire life. His final words reflected his lifelong devotion to clarity and dignity. He left behind no family, no political power, no wealth. But his influence reshaped philosophy more profoundly than almost any thinker before or after him. After Kant, philosophy could not return to its old assumptions. Empiricism alone was insufficient. Rationalism alone was incomplete. Dogmatic metaphysics was no longer acceptable. Kant forced philosophy to examine its own limits. He showed that human reason is powerful, but not infinite. That morality is binding, but not imposed from outside. That freedom is real, but not lawless. His work influenced nearly every major philosophical movement that followed. German idealism grew directly from Kant ideas. Thinkers like Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel attempted to expand and transform his system. Existentialists grappled with his emphasis on autonomy and responsibility. Phenomenology built upon his analysis of experience. Modern ethics, human rights, and political philosophy all bear his mark. Even science was shaped by his insistence that observation depends on conceptual frameworks. Kant's influence extended beyond philosophy into law, education, psychology, and culture. The idea that every human being possesses inherent dignity is now central to modern moral thought. That idea is Kant's legacy. His insistence that people must never be treated merely as tools remains a moral foundation for debates about technology, medicine, and power. In a world driven by efficiency and outcomes, Kant reminds us that how we act matters as much as what we achieve. In a world flooded with information, Kant reminds us that knowledge without moral responsibility is dangerous. In a world that demands constant certainty, Kant reminds us that humility before the limits of reason is a strength. Perhaps most importantly, Kant teaches that freedom is not doing whatever one desires. It is the ability to act according to principles one can rationally defend. This kind of freedom is demanding. It requires self-discipline, reflection, and courage. But it is the only freedom worthy of human dignity. Kant's life was quiet. His work was difficult. His language was demanding. Yet beneath the complexity lies a simple conviction. Human beings matter, not because of what they own, not because of what they produce, not because of their status or success. They matter because they can reason, choose, and act morally. That belief continues to shape the modern world, quietly and persistently, long after Kant's final walk through the streets of Königsberg.